You'd miss it if you blinked. A 5-year-old girl in the park clutched a worn doll. One hand held it tight, the other made a small, deliberate signal, palm out, thumb tucked, fingers curling over. To most, it was nothing. But Sherman, the German shepherd, froze. His handler, David, felt the leash tighten and followed the dog's gaze. The girl stood too still, her dress streaked with dirt. The man beside her walked calmly. Too calmly. Something was wrong, and Sherman sensed it first. David's next move would decide everything. And in that quiet park, a secret was waiting to be uncovered. Comment your city so we can see how far this story reaches. The sun had just lifted over Greenfield Park, spilling soft gold across the damp grass. Dew clung to the blades, catching light like tiny mirrors. The air carried a cool crispness, touched with the smell of freshly cut lawn and the faint sweetness of blooming lilacs. Joggers traced the winding paths, parents steered strollers while sipping coffee, and sparrows darted between branches still heavy with morning moisture. It was a scene of ordinary peace, the kind of morning that promised nothing more dramatic than children laughing by the pond. David Reyes walked slowly along the eastern path, letting the leash slide through his calloused hand. At 41, broad-shouldered and weathered by time, he carried himself like a man who had lived in both noise and silence, and preferred the latter now. A faint limp tugged at his left leg, an old war injury that reminded him of roads in Kandahar and convoys that didn't come back the same. His jaw was square, his stubble trimmed short out of habit more than vanity. Though strangers sometimes read his quiet as coldness, those who knew him understood he was deliberate, sorting the world into what mattered and what did not. At his side trotted Sherman, a 6-year-old German shepherd whose sable and cream coat gleamed in the low light. His amber eyes were sharp, scanning everything. The joggers, the strollers, the pigeons swaggering near breadcrumbs. Sherman moved with the easy grace of a trained athlete, yet carried himself with an alert dignity that often drew second glances. To David, Sherman was more than a dog. He was vigilance embodied, a compass that never stopped pointing toward what mattered. Greenfield Park at this hour was a catalog of simple rituals. A young mother sat cross-legged on a blanket, feeding her toddler sliced fruit. 2 college boys, hair still damp from rushed showers, lobbed a frisbee back and forth with sleepy precision. An elderly couple in matching windbreakers shared a newspaper, chuckling softly at headlines. David nodded politely to those who met his eyes but did not linger. He liked the quiet stitching of routine. Walk, breathe, watch. Then Sherman stopped. Not the polite pause of a dog considering a squirrel. He froze. The full-body stillness of a statue remembering it was once alive. Ears arrowed, tail level, nostrils widening to drink air like it might hold a secret. The leash went taut. David's hand tightened instinctively, a reflex older than thought. His eyes followed the line of Sherman's muzzle. She stood near the duck pond in a pink dress that had negotiated poorly with a patch of dirt. 5 years old, small even for 5, hair the color of dandelion fluff now matted into uncertain curls. In her left arm, she clutched a worn-out doll whose missing button eye had been replaced with a stitched X, as if the world could be corrected with thread. The girl's right hand lifted, slow as if moving through syrup, palm out, thumb tucked in, fingers curling, over like a door softly closing. To most, it was fidgeting. To David, it was a tune he had been taught to recognize, a signal passed around the internet by women's shelters, parent groups, the kind of hand language people share when the mouth is not safe. He watched her face for a flash of mischief, the telltale smirk of a child playing secret games with strangers. He saw none, only the careful stillness of someone trying to be invisible without disappearing. Beside her stood a man in his late 30s, maybe early 40s, lean, like muscle wrapped tight around wire. He wore a gray t-shirt that made his tattoos look like shadows, and jeans that had seen a lot of bending and little washing. His haircut was practical, his beard a few days south of respectable. A narrow scar traced the ridge under his left eye, the kind that happens when bone meets an edge at speed. He had the posture of a person who believes the world is something to be navigated, not admired, handsome enough to be forgettable. His right hand rested on the girl's shoulder, with a weight that wanted to pass for guardianship. David's mind began its old arithmetic: posture, distance, exits. He mapped the park like a floor plan. The man's eyes traveled lazily across the lawn, then over the water, then to the sky, as if clouds deserved a fair hearing. calm. Too calm. David had seen men cultivate calm like a crop. It grew best in poor soil. Sherman let out a sound too low to be a growl, and too focused to be a whine, a sound the body makes when it does not have the words to say now. His front paws adjusted a fraction. His shoulders hardened. His gaze did not blink. David's heartbeat picked up, a drummer testing a tempo. He scanned for anyone who might claim the child, a woman riffling a tote, a father unfolding a blanket, a babysitter adjusting a stroller wheel. He saw no one. Safety, he knew, was fragile because it relied on routine, and routine made people blind. The girl's eyes slid toward Sherman and met the dog's stare with steady silence. Children rarely hold a gaze that firmly unless they are asking a question the mouth cannot form. She made the gesture again, palm out, thumb tucked, fingers folding down. "Easy," David murmured, voice gravel warm. He addressed Sherman, but meant it for himself. The man turned his head just enough to register David and the dog, a brief glance like a shrug of the eyes. He smiled. It did not reach his soul, not menacing, worse, harmless. David had learned to distrust harmless. He sifted through options like a mechanic sorting tools, approach friendly, call the non-emergency line, snap a photo discreetly. But what if he was wrong? If this was an uncle with a scruffy beard and bad laundry habits? He had been wrong before. Those memories stung. Sherman made the decision for him. He stepped forward a half pace, then checked himself. A trained compromise between instinct and command. The leash burned lightly against David's palm. The dog's body telegraphed the conclusion he had already reached. This is not neutral. "Hey there," David said gently, stopping at a respectful distance. "Mind if my guy says hello? He loves kids." The man's smile thinned. "We're good," he said. His accent plain, his tone wrapped in gauze. He didn't ask the girl, he didn't soften his hand. "We were just going." The girl's eyes ticked to David, then to Sherman, then down to her own hand, where she drew the gesture smaller, almost hidden. She swallowed. The sound traveled the short distance like a pebble in a bucket. David let his attention flick briefly to the parking lot, memorizing license plates, calculating which cars were closest to the eastern path. He slipped his phone from his pocket and thumbed the camera without looking. The man adjusted his grip. The girl's shoulders rounded inward, as if practicing invisibility. David watched the hand signal bloom again, so small it could have been a tremor. He could feel the future leaning toward him like a question. Sherman lifted his head, nostrils flaring, and made that quiet, insistent sound again, the prelude in the language of dogs that says, "We are one step past choice." David's heart tapped to the answer it wanted him to give. He took one step after them, and paused. Would he be the man who walked a little farther into someone else's morning, or the man who followed the thread only he and a dog could see? What would you have done if you were in David's shoes? David lingered for a heartbeat on the gravel path, caught between instinct and reason. The sun climbed higher, spilling more warmth into Greenfield Park, but the air around him felt cool, tight. Sherman's leash trembled with the dog's restrained energy. Ahead, the man and the girl moved toward the eastern exit, their silhouettes stretching across the pond's glassy surface. David adjusted his stride, neither rushing nor lagging, practicing the art of following without appearing to. Years of military patrols had carved that ability into his body, how to blend into motion, how to watch without drawing eyes. He slipped the phone from his pocket again and let the camera lens capture what his conscience demanded. A photo of the man's broad back, the faint scar that crept beneath the collar, the child's small form dwarfed beside him. As he moved, a new figure entered the scene, a park groundskeeper in his 50s, stooped but wiry, with skin browned by decades in the sun. His name tag read Hank. He wore a faded green uniform shirt, tucked into heavy canvas pants, a cap shading a face lined like old leather. Hank pushed a cart rattling with tools, rake, trash grabber, a half-full plastic bag. He greeted David with a nod, his eyes sharp despite the gentleness in his smile. Hank was the kind of man who noticed details. He had lived too many mornings to overlook the subtle. "Morning," Hank said, voice gravel softened by kindness. "Morning," David returned, tone even, though his eyes tracked the pair ahead. Hank followed his line of sight and frowned. "That little one looks off," he murmured. He had raised 3 kids himself, grown now, one lost in a car accident that had pressed sorrow permanently into his posture. He recognized unease when he saw it. David only replied with a quiet, "Yeah." The man ahead glanced back once, his eyes grazing over David and Hank, before sliding away again. His grip on the girl tightened. The girl stumbled, then corrected herself quickly, almost as if trained not to slow him down. Sherman's tail flicked stiffly, a signal of rising agitation. They reached the eastern lot where the morning was less crowded. A few cars glittered in the sun. David made mental notes: a white sedan with a cracked taillight, a dark SUV with tinted windows, a dented blue hatchback. The man headed toward the sedan. As they neared, a woman stepped into the scene, emerging from the opposite path. She was tall, perhaps in her late 20s, with a runner's build, long legs, lean arms, and a stride that spoke of miles conquered. Her hair was dark brown, tied back in a high ponytail, her skin fair with the flush of exertion. She wore black leggings, a navy tank top, and a phone strapped to her arm. Her earbuds dangled loose around her neck now as she slowed near the car. Her name, as David would later learn, was Rachel Carter. Rachel noticed the girl first, her brows knit, her expression softening with immediate concern. Rachel had grown up babysitting neighbors' kids and worked now as a pediatric nurse, used to reading small signals of discomfort. The girl's posture set off alarms in her heart before her mind had caught up. "Hey, sweetie," Rachel called gently, her voice friendly but probing. "Cute doll you've got there." The girl's eyes flicked up, hope flaring briefly before the man answered for her. "She's shy," he said quickly, his smile sharp around the edges. Rachel's gaze lingered on the girl. Her training had taught her that silence was sometimes louder than words, but she also saw the dog, the German shepherd with amber eyes, standing rigid, body taut with warning. Dogs told truths people tried to bury. David watched the exchange carefully. He read Rachel's body language, cautious, attentive, willing to push just enough. He stepped forward slightly, placing himself within earshot. Sherman pressed against his leg like a soldier ready for orders. The man unlocked the sedan, guiding the girl toward the passenger side. His hand was firm, decisive. Rachel hesitated, lips parting as if to speak again, but she faltered under the weight of his glare. It was the look of someone who had learned to bend conversations away from scrutiny, who survived by intimidating questions into silence. David's pulse quickened. He knew this moment, before the decisions hardened into actions, before wrong became irreversible. "Excuse me," David said evenly. "Mind if I ask something? That little hand signal she's been making, it's not just fidgeting, is it?" The man stiffened, shoulders rising. His head turned sharply toward David, jaw flexing. "What the hell are you talking about?" Rachel blinked, startled. Hank stopped his cart, eyes narrowing. The girl froze, her small hand trembling near her side. David held his ground, voice calm but unyielding. "I know what I saw, and my dog did too." Sherman's low growl rumbled like distant thunder. For a long second, silence thickened. Then the man barked a laugh, brittle as glass. "You've got some imagination, buddy." He yanked the car door open, shoving the girl inside with more force than needed. The girl's eyes darted once more toward David, and she made the signal again, tiny, desperate, a cry caught between courage and fear. David's chest tightened. Every instinct screamed to intervene, to pull the girl out, to end the scene before the car engine turned over. But training and reason held him frozen. He had no badge anymore, no warrant, no legal ground. One wrong move could unravel everything. Rachel stepped closer, heart pounding. She wanted to say something, to stop him, but her mind filled with the faces of patients she had treated. Bruises excused as playground falls, eyes shadowed with silence. She whispered, "She's not okay." Hank set down his rake, jaw tightening. "Neither is that man." The car engine roared to life. David lifted. His phone, snapping another photo, license plate, make, model. The man shot him a glare that promised trouble, then peeled the sedan out of the lot, gravel spitting behind. The girl's face pressed against the window, pale and terrified, her small hand lingering in one final signal until the car turned out of sight. Sherman barked once, sharp and cutting through the morning air. People turned their heads, confused, unaware of what had just happened. David exhaled slowly. His hand trembled, though his voice remained steady. "That wasn't nothing." Rachel looked at him, eyes wide. "What now?" David clenched his jaw. "Now we don't let her vanish." Sherman whined softly, pressing against his leg as if to say, "The hunt begins." The white sedan had vanished down the road, leaving only the dust of doubt and the echo of Sherman's sharp bark. For a long beat, the three adults stood frozen in the eastern lot. David with the phone still in his hand, Rachel with her brow drawn tight, Hank resting on his rake as if the tool could steady the unease in his chest. Sherman pressed close to David's leg, tail rigid, eyes scanning the distance where the car had gone. The dog's body vibrated with restrained urgency. Rachel broke the silence first. "That little girl," she whispered, almost to herself. "She was asking for help. I've seen kids in the hospital who couldn't find the words." That signal, she wasn't guessing. Hank exhaled heavily, the sigh of a man who had raised children and buried one. His voice was rough. "I've been around long enough to know when something's not right." That man's hand on her shoulder wasn't protection. It was possession. David slipped his phone back into his jacket. He felt the weight of it like a stone. "I got the plate. White sedan, cracked taillight, older model. But a photo isn't proof." Rachel turned to him fully, studying his face. She noticed the limp when he shifted weight, the careful way he measured each word. "You're not just some guy walking his dog, are you?" David's lips thinned into something like a smile, but it carried no warmth. "Army, retired now, but you don't leave instincts behind?" The morning bustle of the park continued around them, oblivious. A jogger trotted past humming to music. A mother coaxed her toddler into finishing a juice box. The world had not shifted for anyone but the three of them. Rachel squared her shoulders. "Then we need to do something. She could be in real danger. We can't just hope someone else notices." David studied her. Tall, strong, eyes that belonged to someone who had seen fear in children before. She had the energy of someone used to standing up for others, though beneath it he caught a flicker of doubt. People who cared often carried scars invisible to others. "Agreed," he said finally, "but we have to be smart. If we overstep, he vanishes deeper. If we hesitate, she suffers." Hank adjusted his cap, weathered hands gripping the rake. "So, what's the plan, soldier?" David considered. "We take what we know to the police. A wellness check, maybe. At the very least, they'll put eyes on the girl." Rachel nodded quickly. "I work at St. Anne's Children's Hospital. I know a detective who sometimes comes in with cases. She trusts me. If I call her, maybe she'll listen." She pulled her phone from the strap on her arm, scrolling quickly. The screen lit her flushed face. A moment later, she tapped a name, Detective Karen Wells. The call rang twice before a voice answered, low and steady. "Wells," Rachel's voice firmed. "Detective, it's Rachel Carter from St. Anne's. I need your help. Right now." On the other end, Karen Wells leaned back in her office chair, fingers tightening around her pen. She was in her mid-40s, medium height, strong build, softened at the edges by years behind a desk rather than in the field. Her hair was chestnut streaked with gray, tied in a loose bun. A faint scar cut across her left eyebrow, a souvenir from a raid that had gone wrong in her early days. She had the face of someone who had carried others' burdens for too long, stern, lined, but with an undercurrent of compassion that never quite hardened out of her. "Talk to me, Rachel," Wells said. Rachel took a breath. "There's a girl, maybe 5 years old, in the park this morning with a man who didn't look like family." She made the hand signal, the one for help. "I'm with 2 witnesses. One of them got the license plate." Silence crackled for a moment. Wells's voice dropped lower. "You're certain about the signal?" "Yes," Rachel replied, steady now. "I've seen it before." She wasn't playing. David leaned closer to the phone. "We're not imagining this, detective. The child's in trouble." "And you are?" Wells asked. "David Reyes, retired Army." His tone was clipped, factual. "I've got photos." There was another pause, then a slow exhale from the other side. "All right. Bring what you have to the station. We'll start with a welfare check. Where are you now?" "The east lot at Greenfield Park," Rachel answered. "I'll send a unit to meet you," Wells said. "Stay there. And don't follow him yourselves. Understood?" David exchanged a look with Rachel, then Hank. None of them promised aloud, but Rachel answered. "Understood." The call ended. Rachel's shoulders sagged slightly, relief mixed with worry. "She's taking it seriously." Hank rubbed his jaw, eyes still on the road where the car had disappeared. "Let's hope it's enough." Minutes passed before a squad car rolled into the lot, lights off, but presence undeniable. Out stepped Officer Daniel Brooks, uniform crisp, mid-30s, with a square jaw and neatly kept beard. His hair was close-cropped, his posture upright. He had the air of a man who believed in procedure, who liked rules because they kept the world from tipping into chaos. His handshake was firm, his gaze assessing. "Detective Wells sent me," Brooks said. "Which one of you's Reyes?" David stepped forward. "That's me." He handed over the phone with the photos. "This is the car. This is the man." The plate's clear, Brooks scrolled, his brows knitting. "Yeah, that's good work. We'll run the plate. But until we confirm more, there's only so much we can do." Rachel bristled. "So much you can do." She's 5 years old. She asked for help. Brooks's gaze softened slightly at Rachel's intensity. "I'm not dismissing it, ma'am, but we need to follow channels. A wellness check is already being set up." "Detective Wells is on it," Sherman barked once, sharp, breaking the tension. The dog's eyes never stopped scanning, nose twitching, as though still holding the girl's scent in memory. David placed a calming hand on Sherman's neck. His voice was calm, but carried weight. "Don't let this get buried in paperwork, officer. That child doesn't have time for bureaucracy." Brooks met his eyes, something unspoken passing between soldier and cop. "I'll do what I can." He climbed back into the squad car, radio crackling. The vehicle pulled away, carrying the photos and the fragile hope of intervention. Rachel crossed her arms, hugging herself against a chill that wasn't in the air. "Do you think they'll find her?" David looked at the empty road, jaw clenched. "They'd better. But either way, we won't stop here." Hank grunted in agreement. "That little girl deserves better than being forgotten." Sherman whined softly, resting his head against David's thigh. The dog's body was warm, steady, insistent. A reminder that silence must be answered. For now all they could do was wait. But waiting had never sat well with David Reyes. The squad car disappeared down the street, carrying Officer Brooks and the fragile promise of a wellness check. Yet David remained rooted in the parking lot, shoulders squared, fists resting on his hips. Sherman paced beside him, restless, nose twitching, as if still following the scent of the child that had been taken. Rachel crossed her arms tightly, her ponytail swishing with every frustrated turn of her head. "I can't just go back to my run after this," she muttered. Her voice had the sharpness of someone accustomed to acting quickly in emergencies. Hank leaned on his rake like it was a staff. His eyes, wrinkled by years of sun, carried the heaviness of a father who had lost. "Cops will do their job," he said slowly. "But paperwork moves slower than evil. If we sit here, we'll be wondering what we didn't do." David exhaled, the air leaving him like steam from an old engine. "I agree. Waiting isn't an option. If she's in danger, every hour matters." His eyes hardened. "We find out where that car went." Rachel glanced at him, hesitant. "You're talking about following this ourselves?" "Not instead of the police, see," David said firmly. "Alongside them. We don't interfere with their process, but we can't let him vanish into thin air." Hank chuckled bitterly. "Thin air's exactly where men like that know how to hide." Before they could decide further, a car pulled into the lot, a battered brown hatchback that looked as though it had survived more winters than it deserved. The driver stepped out, adjusting his thick glasses. Martin Lopez was 38, a local freelance journalist whose curiosity was both his livelihood and his curse. His frame was lanky, almost awkward, with clothes that always looked one size too big. His hair, black and perpetually disheveled, stuck out in tufts as though rebelling against combs. He carried a notepad tucked into the crook of his arm, his pen already tapping against it like a heartbeat. Rachel recognized him instantly. "Martin, what are you doing here?" He shrugged, his smile crooked. "Got a tip about police activity in the park. Figured I'd check it out. Didn't expect to see you." His gaze shifted to David and Hank, then down to Sherman, who met him with a low growl. David stepped forward, wary. "This isn't a story." "Not yet," Martin raised his brows. "Everything's a story, depending on how it ends. Why don't you tell me what's happening, and I'll decide if the public deserves to know." Rachel hesitated. She knew Martin's reputation, tenacious, sometimes reckless, but not without conscience. A child might be in danger. That's all you need to know. Martin scribbled something in his notebook, his tone softening. "Danger is enough. I can help. People talk to me, doors open. If you're following this, you'll want someone who can ask questions without a badge." David's jaw tightened. He disliked Reporters, too much digging, not enough discretion. But he also recognized the truth. Information was currency, and Martin seemed eager to spend. "Fine," David said finally, "but you follow our lead." "No stunts," Martin smirked faintly. "Scout's honor, though I was never a scout," Sherman huffed, as if voicing his disapproval. The group piled into Rachel's SUV, Sherman taking the back seat. David sat up front, scanning the road with soldierly intensity. Hank muttered, "Feels like we're starting a chase without knowing the finish line." Rachel drove steadily, her hands firm on the wheel. "We start with the plate. Brooks will run it, but we can too. I've got contacts at the DMV. They might give me something." Martin tapped his pen. "I know a guy at the local garage association. Mechanics gossip more than bartenders. If that sedan's been serviced recently, I'll find out." David nodded approvingly. "Good." We split the threads, then weave them back together. They drove through the city's arteries, buildings rising taller, traffic thickening. The morning sun was now full overhead, baking the asphalt into shimmering heat. David stared out the window, mind replaying the girl's signal, the desperate press of her palm against invisible glass. He remembered moments overseas when civilians had used gestures, tiny, hidden signs, to beg for safety without words. His chest tightened with the familiar weight. He had failed some of them. He would not fail this one. Sherman leaned forward, resting his muzzle on David's shoulder. His warm breath puffed reassurance. David scratched behind his ear, whispering, "We'll find her, buddy." Rachel pulled into a diner parking lot, suggesting they regroup before chasing leads. Inside, the diner smelled of coffee, bacon, and old linoleum. The waitress, Marcy, greeted them with a tired smile. She was in her early 40s, hair dyed auburn, skin pale beneath freckles, with an apron tied too tight around her waist. She had a voice like sandpaper dipped in honey, friendly, yet worn by long shifts. They slid into a booth, Sherman lying loyally at David's feet. Hank ordered black coffee, Rachel a tea, Martin a soda, David nothing. He was focused on his phone, pulling up every contact he had left from his army days, who might still have law enforcement ties. As they sipped, Martin leaned across the table. "Tell me more about the guy. Build, mannerisms, anything odd." David recited the details, the scar beneath the eye, the tattoos, the way his thumb tapped rhythm on the girl's shoulder. Rachel added how quickly he cut off her attempt at conversation. Hank contributed his gut sense. He carried himself like someone used to getting his way. Like he expected people to look away. Martin jotted it all down. "Sounds like someone with a history." Just then, Rachel's phone buzzed. She glanced down, heart skipping. A text from Detective Wells. Plate, registered to a James Holloway. Address on file, 222 Orchard Street, Unit 3B. Rachel showed the screen. David's eyes narrowed. "We've got a name," Martin whistled low, "and an address." "That's gold, careful," Hank warned. "Gold's what gets people killed if they dig too fast." David pocketed the phone. "We don't storm in. We watch, gather, confirm. If the police drag their feet, we'll have proof they can't ignore." Rachel nodded, determination tightening her features. Martin grinned nervously, scribbling notes. Hank muttered, "Feels like trouble's already waiting at Orchard Street." Sherman lifted his head suddenly, ears pricking, as if he too knew the road ahead was about to change everything. The afternoon sun had dulled into a muted glow by the time Rachel's SUV turned onto Orchard Street. The neighborhood bore the weary face of a city block, forgotten by progress. Brick apartments with paint peeling like old scabs, narrow alleys littered with bottles, and iron fire escapes that clung to the buildings like rusted scars. The hum of traffic here was thinner, punctuated by the occasional shout of kids kicking a soccer ball between parked cars. David scanned the street with a soldier's practiced eye. Every window, every doorway carried the potential of either witness or threat. Sherman sat tall in the back seat, ears perked, nose twitching at the mix of stale beer, garbage, and cooked onions drifting on the warm air. Rachel slowed near a 3-story building with chipped cream paint and a faded for-rent sign dangling crookedly. "Unit 3B, she murmured, her voice tight. From the corner, an older man shuffled into view. Mr. Delgado was in his late 60s, broad-shouldered but softened by age. His silver hair was slicked back, his brown skin creased with lines of labor and worry. A janitor's keyring clinked against his belt as he dragged a mop bucket along the sidewalk. His eyes, dark and sharp, lingered on Rachel's SUV. Martin, ever the journalist, leaned forward. Locals always know more than they say. Let me try. He hopped out before David could object, notebook in hand. Good afternoon, sir. Martin Lopez, freelance reporter. You live here? Delgado gave him a look that mixed suspicion with fatigue. I work here. 20 years. Seen plenty of reporters come sniffing. Usually means trouble. Martin's smile was quick, lopsided. Maybe it does, but sometimes trouble's already here. He flicked his gaze toward the third floor. James Holloway. You know him? Delgado's face darkened. That one? Yes. Keeps to himself, but not in a good way. Brings people in at night, never neighbors. The kind who walk fast, talk quiet. The little girl... He cut himself off, jaw tightening. David joined them, his presence calm but steady. You saw a girl? Delgado hesitated. His hands worked the mop handle like it was a worry bead. Finally, he nodded. Couple times, small, blonde, never smiling. He pulls her along like luggage. Thought she was his niece, maybe, but she never looked like she belonged. Rachel stepped closer, her nurse's eyes soft. Did she ever speak? Delgado shook his head. Not once. Sherman barked once from inside the SUV, sharp enough to draw eyes from the children across the street. David calmed him with a hand signal. Thank you, David told Delgado, his voice weighted with sincerity. You've helped more than you know. Delgado's gaze lingered on him, then softened. Be careful. Men like Holloway, they bite before they bark. Back in the SUV, Martin scribbled furiously in his notebook. That's confirmation. A witness. If we bring this to Wells, David cut him off. We don't have enough yet. We need to see for ourselves. Rachel frowned. You're suggesting we surveil him? Without backup? Hank, who had been quiet until now, rumbled from the back. Kid's in there. Maybe tonight she's gone. If we wait, the cops might be too late. His voice cracked on the word gone. The ghost of his lost child hung heavy in the car. David looked up at the building. Shadows stretched long across the brick, swallowing the edges of windows. His jaw tightened. We set up across the street. Watch, record. We move only if we have no choice. They found an abandoned storefront opposite the apartment, its windows dusted with grime, but still granting a partial view of 3B. Rachel parked out front. Sherman lay by David's side, ears flicking with every noise. An hour passed, then 2. The block shifted from afternoon laziness to evening unease. Neon signs buzzed alive. Music thumped faintly from a nearby bar. It was Martin who first spotted movement. Curtains, he whispered, pointing to 3B. David followed his finger. The curtain twitched, revealing for a brief second the man they now knew as James Holloway. Up close, his features sharpened, the scar under his eye deeper, his jaw hollowed, his tattoos crawling like black ivy down his arm. He paced the room, phone pressed to his ear, agitation in his shoulders. And then her, the girl. Small frame, pink dress changed for a gray t-shirt that hung too large. She stood near the window, doll clutched still in one arm. Her eyes darted out, wide, fearful. Sherman tensed, letting out a low rumble. David stroked his back to quiet him, though his own chest pounded. Rachel's breath caught. That's her! Martin raised his camera, zooming through the grime to snap photos. The shutter clicked softly. Suddenly, Holloway turned. He grabbed the curtain and yanked it closed, his face catching the light just long enough to reveal eyes empty of remorse, filled with calculation. The group sank back into silence, the weight of what they'd seen pressing down on them. David whispered, "Now we know she's alive. But for how long?" The night pressed closer, shadows thickening around Orchard Street. The curtain snapped shut, leaving only the memory of the girl's wide eyes staring into the street below. Inside the abandoned storefront, the group sat in heavy silence. Neon light from a liquor shop sign bled red across the dusty floor, painting them like conspirators. Sherman paced back and forth, restless, the click of his claws on tile the only sound. David leaned against the wall, arms crossed tight. She's alive. That's something. His voice was steady, but the weight in it told another story. Rachel, sitting on an overturned crate, rubbed her temples. Alive, but for how long? We can't just watch. Her tone cracked at the edges, shaped by years of caring for sick children whose lives often depended on quick action, not patience. Hank let out a gravelly sigh. I've buried one child already. I'm not watching another slip through our fingers. His weathered face tightened, lines deepening with memory. Martin tapped his pen nervously against his notebook. We've got photos, testimony from Delgado, and a plate number. If we hand this over, it's enough to push Wells harder, but if we go in ourselves... He trailed off, his thin frame hunched as though even words carried danger. David pushed away from the wall. We wait. We lose her. We storm in. We risk everything. Either way, we decide tonight. Sherman froze, ears swiveling. A faint sound carried through the brick wall, raised voices. Holloway's voice, sharp and venomous, though muffled. Then a smaller, higher tone, timid, pleading. The girl. Rachel shot up, fists clenched. He's yelling at her. David's jaw tightened. His soldier's mind mapped the building instinctively. Stairs at the front, fire escape at the side. One way in, two ways out. He could almost hear the rhythm of boots on gravel from his past. But now it was sneakers on a dusty floor. Before they could act, the door to the storefront creaked. Everyone stiffened. A woman stepped in, startled to find the group. She was in her mid-30s, slender, with tightly coiled black hair pulled into a bun. Her skin was smooth but pale under the harsh neon, her brown eyes sharp with suspicion. She wore a faded denim jacket over a floral dress and carried a grocery bag in one hand. "Who are you?" she demanded. Rachel recovered first. "We're waiting for a friend?" The woman narrowed her eyes. "In a clothes shop? At night?" She glanced at Sherman, whose hackles rose slightly. "That dog doesn't look like he's here for company." David stepped forward, calm but firm. "We're watching someone across the street. James Holloway. Do you know him?" The woman's mouth pressed thin. For a moment she looked ready to turn and leave. Then she shook her head slowly. "Name's Angela Torres. I live next door. And yeah, I know him. Or at least, I know what he is." The group leaned in. Angela set her grocery bag down, arms folded across her chest. "He moved in. About a year ago. Never friendly, always late-night visitors. And the girl? I've seen her. She stares out at that window like she's in a cage." Angela's face hardened. "I called the landlord once. He told me to mind my business," Hank muttered. "Sounds like a landlord who doesn't want trouble." Angela nodded grimly. "Or is paid not to." Rachel stepped closer. "Would you be willing to talk to the police?" Angela hesitated, biting her lip. "I've got a little boy upstairs. 10 years old. I don't want Holloway knowing I spoke against him." Her fear was palpable, maternal instinct pulling her in two directions. David's voice softened. "We'll protect your name. But your testimony could save that girl." Angela looked at him for a long moment, then nodded reluctantly. "All right, but you better mean it." Sherman let out another low rumble. This time, footsteps echoed in the hall outside Holloway's apartment. David moved to the window. Holloway was dragging a large duffel bag down the stairs, face tight with urgency. Rachel gasped. "Is he moving her?" David's stomach sank. Or something worse. Martin's hands shook as he lifted his camera. The lens zoomed, capturing Holloway's hunched figure, shoving the bag into the trunk of his car. No sign of the girl. Sherman whined, tugging at the leash. His body language screamed urgency. David's mind raced. They had a witness, photos, and suspicions, but nothing solid enough to storm in without risking charges themselves. Yet if Holloway drove away now, they might lose her forever. He turned to Rachel. "Call Wells. Tell her it's happening now." Rachel's fingers fumbled with her phone, dialing quickly. "Detective Wells, it's Carter. He's leaving. Right now. We think the girl's with him." Through the window, Holloway slammed the trunk shut and climbed into the sedan. The engine growled to life. David clenched his fists. "We either follow him or we let him vanish." Sherman barked sharply, the sound reverberating like a command. The SUV keys jingled in Rachel's hand. "Then we follow." The car peeled away from the curb, taillights glowing red against the dark street. Moments later, Rachel's SUV rolled into pursuit, headlights off. David sat in the passenger seat, eyes locked ahead. Sherman braced between them, silent but coiled with anticipation. Behind them, Angela stood at the window of her apartment, heart pounding, clutching her grocery bag like a shield. She whispered a prayer for the girl she barely knew, hoping these strangers could do what she had been too afraid to attempt. Rachel's SUV glided through the city streets, headlights dimmed, engine a steady hum beneath the tension inside. Sherman balanced on all fours in the back, his muscles taut, amber eyes fixed forward as though he could already sense the danger. David sat in the passenger seat, gaze locked on the red taillights of the white sedan ahead. "Keep 2 car lengths back," David instructed, voice low but firm. Rachel's knuckles whitened around the steering wheel. "I know how to tail," she shot back, but her tone betrayed nerves. Martin scribbled in his notebook, his glasses slipping down his nose. "We're chasing him, but what's the plan when he stops?" "We can't exactly storm in guns blazing," Hank grunted from the rear seat. "No plan survives first contact, but we're not letting him vanish." "Not this time." His voice carried the weight of a father who knew what loss could carve into a man's soul. The sedan turned down an industrial road, streetlights flickering, warehouses looming like tired giants. Rachel slowed, keeping distance. David's soldier's mind cataloged every shadow, every alley, every potential escape route. Finally, the sedan pulled into a derelict lot behind a shuttered factory. Holloway killed the engine and stepped out, hauling the duffel bag from the trunk. Even at a distance, David could see his movements were hurried, eyes scanning. Sherman growled softly. "Stay sharp," David murmured. He opened the SUV door quietly, motioning for the others to follow. They spread out, moving between rusted containers and broken fencing. The night air reeked of oil and damp concrete. David signaled for silence. Years of training returned to him like muscle memory, each step calculated. From the shadows, they watched Holloway drag the duffel toward a side door of the factory. He fumbled with a key, cursing under his breath, then shoved the bag inside. The door slammed behind him. Rachel's breath hitched. "She's in there." David nodded grimly. "We go." Before they could act, headlights swept across the lot. A black sedan rolled in, newer, cleaner, too sharp for the setting. 2 men stepped out, tall, both in dark jackets. Their posture screamed enforcement, not friendship. One of them, Victor Kane, was broad-shouldered with a square jaw shadowed by a week's growth of beard. His blonde hair was cropped short, his eyes pale blue and cold. A jagged scar ran from ear to chin, twisting his smile into something cruel. Victor's reputation preceded him in whispers. Once a bouncer in underground clubs, notorious for violent outbursts after his brother died in prison, rage had become his currency. The second, Leo Burns, was leaner, wiry, his skin sallow under the streetlight. He wore his hair slicked back, revealing a receding hairline, and his thin mustache twitched when he spoke. Leo had grown up in foster homes, hardened early, known for his talent at intimidation without lifting a hand. He was the kind of man who thrived in someone else's shadow, dangerous because he enjoyed cruelty. Martin whispered, "They're not here for tea." David's jaw clenched. "Back up. Holloway isn't working alone." The 2 men entered the factory. The lot fell silent again, save for Sherman's low growl. Rachel looked at David, eyes wide. "What now? We can't take 3 men alone." "We don't need to," David said. "We need to get her out." They crept closer to the side door. David tested the handle, locked. Sherman sniffed the gap beneath, whining softly. The dog's body language screamed urgency. Hank, surprising them all, picked up a length of pipe from the ground. His voice was steady. "I'll make noise at the front. Draw them out." "You get the girl." "No," David hissed. "Too risky." But Hank's eyes burned with resolve. "You don't know what it's like to bury a child. I won't stand by again." Before David could stop him, Hank moved off toward the front entrance. A moment later, the clang of metal echoed as he struck the door. Holloway's voice barked from inside. Footsteps followed. Victor and Leo emerged first, scanning the lot. Hank swung the pipe again, shouting, "Over here!" Then he bolted between stacks of pallets. The 2 men chased, curses flying. David seized the moment. He forced the side door open with his shoulder. Inside, the factory was dim, reeking of mildew and oil. The duffel bag lay unzipped on the floor, empty. A muffled whimper echoed from deeper within. Sherman darted forward, nose to the ground, then up a narrow staircase. David and Rachel followed, Martin stumbling behind with his notebook, clutched like a shield. On the second floor, they found a locked office door. From inside came the faint sound of a child crying. Rachel's voice broke. "She's in there!" David kicked the door once, twice. The third blow splintered the frame. The door burst open. The girl huddled in the corner, arms wrapped around her doll, eyes wide with terror. Dirt smeared her face, but when she saw Sherman, her expression cracked into fragile relief. She lifted her hand weakly, making the same signal, palm out, thumb tucked, fingers folding. Sherman bounded forward, tail wagging, whining softly. He pressed his muzzle into her hand. Rachel knelt, tears stinging her eyes. "It's okay, sweetheart. We've got you now." Suddenly, Holloway stormed into the room, rage twisting his features. "What the hell are you doing here?" David stepped between him and the girl, fists clenched. "It's over, Holloway." Holloway sneered. "You think you can stop this? You have no idea who you're dealing with." Behind him, distant sirens wailed, closer, louder. Rachel's call to Wells had not been in vain. Holloway lunged. David met him head-on, years of training pouring into the clash. Sherman leapt, teeth snapping inches from Holloway's arm, forcing him back. The sirens crescendoed. Red and blue lights washed through the grimy windows. Officers stormed the building, weapons drawn. Among them was Detective Karen Wells, her presence commanding. "Police," she barked. "Hands where I can see them." Holloway froze, chest heaving. Victor and Leo were dragged in moments later, pinned by officers who had caught them in the lot. Rachel cradled the girl, rocking her gently. "You're safe now," she whispered. Wells surveyed the scene, eyes settling on David. Recognition flickered. "Reyes, I should have known you wouldn't just wait." But there was no anger in her voice, only gratitude. The girl reached out, clutching Sherman's fur, burying her face against him. His amber eyes softened, tail wagging gently. For the first time all night, David allowed himself to breathe. We didn't let her vanish. Sometimes, miracles don't arrive with thunder in the sky. They come on four paws, through the steady courage of strangers, and the silent prayers of a child who refuses to give up hope. In moments like these, we're reminded that God still works quietly in the corners of our everyday lives, guiding hearts, stirring instincts, and protecting the most vulnerable among us. May this story remind us to stay watchful, to believe in small signs, and to answer cries for help, even when they are silent. And may the Lord bless you and your loved ones with protection, compassion, and courage in your own daily walk. If this story touched your heart, please share it so others may find hope. Leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe to join us in more stories of faith, courage, and loyalty. Together, let's keep the light alive, and may God's grace be with everyone watching.